On this evening, we invite you to Acts chapter 17, verses 24 through 28. Again, Acts chapter 17, verses 24 through 28. As you're turning to Acts chapter 17, again, starting with verse 24, let's admit something that may not always be at the forefront of our thinking about relationships we have with people. And that is, we do not always enjoy closer or deeper relationships with people, sometimes for many different reasons. Mainly, we don't take the time to know someone, and because we don't always know them, we severely limit the depths of that relationship. Think about the word relationship. A part of that word is the word relate. We have to be able to relate to others in order to enjoy those types of relationships. Sometimes we don't relate to others because we make assumptions about people. We just think we know what we need to know and don't take the time to verify or perhaps learn something different about what we've assumed. Sometimes our relationships suffer because of the expectations we have. We desire what we want out of a relationship and don't give room for other diverse opinions, or perspectives, or ways of seeing or doing things. We can also superimpose our thoughts and feelings from one person onto another. So, because we've experienced something with a person in a given circumstance in life, we may take that baggage and apply it to someone else. Some people are just guarded. They're just not interested in having close personal relationships. And unfortunately, relationships can suffer and we don't relate to people because of selflessness. If we can understand these thoughts in our relationships, or perhaps lack thereof with people, give some consideration as to what type of relationship we have with God. In Acts chapter 17, starting at verse 24, the Bible says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he gives to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and have determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. The backdrop of this particular passage is that Paul is in the city of Athens. And in this particular city, he is preaching to a crowd of mixed people. When I say mixed, I'm not speaking relative to racial or ethnic diversity, but the diversity of this crowd is comprised of the level of interest that people had in his preaching. While we always assume that when one preaches, one has a crowd of individuals who are keenly interested in what is being said, we discover in verse number 16 that this is a city that is full of idolatry. So, a part of the makeup of the crowd were people who worshiped false gods. We also discover in verse 21 of Acts chapter 17 that there were people who were there not because they were seeking truth, but they were just seeking to have something to talk about. Some people just come to see so that they can go back and have something to say. As he is speaking, he is talking to this crowd in Athens about the relationship that God desires to have with people. Unfortunately, many people do not enjoy a greater relationship with God because they see God as some distant God who is far off and far removed from humanity. We see this as he mentions in verse number 27 in the last part, that he says, He be not far from every one of us. As we talk about having this relationship with God, we have to understand reasons why we may not be in a closer relationship. Number one, we may not take the time to learn about Him. Relationships require a knowledge, an intimate knowledge of one another. Number two, we may not take the time with Him. Some people are just too busy for God. But notice in this passage, and in particular, I want you to notice in verse number 25, where the Bible teaches us that He is not worshiped with man's hands as though He needed anything, seeing as thou He gives life to all. Understand, God does not need anything we offer Him, but He desires it. Also, I want you to take note in verse 24, where it says God does not dwell in temples made with hands. That's an important concept to consider, because we may not take time with Him, and we could easily assume that the little time we have on Sunday in a quote-unquote church building is sufficient, when God is looking to dwell not in a building, but dwell in us. We may believe that God is far from us, when clearly this passage says that He is not. We may have an unhealthy fear of God. When we say an unhealthy fear, we're saying that yes, we should fear God, we should respect God, and we should be afraid of God's anger and God's wrath. But an unhealthy fear of God is to make the assumption that God is just sitting waiting to catch us doing something wrong. And so it alienates us and keeps us from relating to Him and understanding His relating to us, because we unhealthily can believe that God is looking to condemn us. We may want a relationship with God on our terms, but having a relationship is just that, relating to one another. Any relationship that is solely on one person's terms is not a relationship, but is an unhealthy dominance. Sometimes people are just not fully interested or committed to God. They'll fit Him in when they want to fit Him in, as they are in the pursuit of the pleasures of the things of life. Sometimes people are too busy, too distracted, and too institutionally connected. It is unfortunate that some consider a relationship with God based on their organizational experience as opposed to a relational experience. God doesn't just want to know you in the church or through the church. He wants to know you personally. In order to appreciate what this passage is teaching, we need to rethink the person of God. He's not distant, and He's not unconcerned. Just the opposite, He is close, closer than we might think. We also need to rethink then the place of God. Again, in verse number 24, He does not dwell in temples made with hands. But in verse 27, notice a phrase here, that they should seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after Him. This phrase, feel after Him, in the original language, it has reference to reaching for something in the dark. It's like when you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and you don't turn on the light, but you're reaching, you're making your way based off of reaching in the dark. God is telling us that in the darkness of our lives, we should be reaching for Him. And then we have to rethink the purpose of God, that we may seek Him because He desires to be found. He is not in the remote hills or some place that is deserted or hard to get to, but he desires to be present with us so that we can have that relationship. My encouragement to you would be to set aside some quiet time every day so that you and the Lord can commune together. When we think of communing, we have a tendency of thinking of the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper is a form of communion, but it is not the exclusive means by which we commune. We commune with His Spirit, where His Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are indeed the sons and daughters of God. Seek Him in the dark days of your life, in those moments where you're dark or you're experiencing dark realities. That's a time to feel in the dark and reach out to God. And study all about Him. Learn as much as you can, because He desires a relationship with us, and He seeks it not in an institutional or organizational experience, but He desires it in a relational experience where He relates to us, we relate to Him, and we get closer together. He says, draw nigh to me, and I'll draw nigh to you. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.